All right, so for today, you just need to take these notes on a piece of paper. You'll be able to use these on your next test. If you get trade-up notes, if you show me these and you've done enough, you'll be able to get those. So on these notes, what we have here is at the start, it just talks about the Second Continental Congress to remind you of what's come before the Articles. And remember, in 1776, the Second Continental Congress met, and Richard Henry Lee, after reading Thomas Paine's Common Sense, brought up that the colonies should be free and independent states. And once that had been decided, a committee was set up that Thomas Jefferson led to write the Declaration of Independence to let the world know that we were breaking away. And then through the next 5 years, as we fought the war, the Second Continental Congress tried to establish a confederacy. Now, the reason the Second Continental Congress wanted to establish a confederacy is, as you can see here in the notes, the government we were breaking away from in England was a unitary government. And a unitary government, as we've had before in this diagram here, is a government where the national government has all the power. And you can see here, we were breaking away from England, where the national government had the big arrow. They had all the power. And they were telling the smaller governments, our colonies, exactly what they could or couldn't do. We didn't want to live under this anymore. So what we established was the exact opposite, which is a confederacy. And as you can see here in the notes, that's when these smaller regional governments have the power and they can tell the larger national government what to do. In this diagram here, you can see now that the state governments are strong. They have the power. The arrows are pointing back at the national government. And the main reason then for even having a national government is for protection. Each of our individual states were too small to win the war on their own, but together they could defeat a power like England, and so we needed to stick together. But make no mistake, each of the states saw their own state as their own country, and the national government was a means to an end to win the war. This cartoon does a great job of showing that. As you see at the top, the Declaration of Independence has been signed. We are free. And now the men say, now what? And they say, what do you mean what? And they say, well, we need to establish a government to help us win this war. And the men in the cartoon say, my government is my colony, my state, Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, whoever. And they get in a fight because that's what they care about. They're there to protect their own state first. That's what they want, to be independent. And after much debate and arguing, they do establish the Articles of Confederation. But as you can see at the bottom of this cartoon, it's a loose group of friendships. It's not an actual nation like we have today where we're all in it together. As you can see from this cartoon, some states are more connected than others, with some states holding hands to show they are connected, with others talking to each other but not connected, and some actually turning their backs on others. This was not a strong national government like we have today. Before going to the second page of notes, just wanted to make sure if you have to hit pause, get the top part of these notes completed, and for the cartoon below, maybe get any of the major ideas that I mentioned in the video. So the government we wanted to set up for the nation was a weak government, which we know fails. And so you might say, well, how can these founding fathers, who we consider so smart, create such a bad government? There's a lot of reasons behind that. And the reason they created a weak national government is because they were so scared of a strong government like they had just escaped from England, a government that had a lot of national power and a very strong leader like the king. And also because of many of the events that we've studied in the road to revolution that took away their rights to life, liberty, and property, they put in protections to make sure no government could ever do those things. But unfortunately, by making a weak government that couldn't take away your rights, you had a government that also couldn't protect you when you needed help that a government provides. So if these founding fathers created a bad government with the Articles of Confederation, then what did they learn during the road to revolution? We had said they learned a lot from British history, the past. They did created a more democratic government here. Why don't we see that? Well, we do see those improvements and what they learned when we look at the state governments that they created. Each of the 13 states created a great government. All of the governments had popular sovereignty, which means the people could vote for their leaders in the state legislatures. All of those state governments had rule of law, where laws were written down and everyone had to follow them. All of the state governments had checks and balances through a 3-branch system of government, which also created separation of powers. All of these state governments as well had Bill of Rights tied into their constitutions, which made sure the people's rights were protected. If this sounds familiar, it should, because each of our 13 states set up a government very similar to what we have today with the Constitution. They set up governments that were very limited and made sure the people's rights were protected, but still gave the government power to get things done. We just created a weak national government at the time because we were so scared of having something similar to England's. So we know that the Articles of Confederation were weak. Its main weakness was that the national government could not levy taxes. It could not make a tax where the people of the nation would have to pay money to the government to allow it to get things done. Why did we create a government that couldn't collect taxes? Because we were so afraid of what the king had done to us by passing taxes without our consent. We didn't even allow the government to have any taxes ever. The state governments had taxes. We would pay taxes there, but it was because we voted in our states and we felt protected. Although not being able to pass taxes was the most important weakness of the Articles, all of them serve some purpose in understanding why it failed. Please copy down this chart, paying special attention to the weaknesses that each state only had one vote, and that to pass a law, you had to have 9 of the 13 states vote yes. Today, we only need a majority, which is 1 more vote than half. But back then, you had to get 9 of the 13 states, which is around 70%. The reason for this is each state thought of itself as its own little country, and they didn't want just the small states or just the big states or just the northern states or just the small states to be able to have too much power. So it took a larger percentage to pass a law. And also notice that even if a law did pass, because each state was sovereign, they didn't even have to follow laws that were passed by the national government. And as we look to the bottom part of this chart, notice also that there was no executive branch. There was no president in the country at this time because we didn't want to have a leader who might end up becoming like a dictator or a king. So we just didn't have an executive office, and we didn't have a judicial branch with a national court system because we didn't want to have a court that the leaders could use to take advantage of the states. Today, our president, whenever there is a major problem, takes charge. At that time, there was no one to take charge. Each state was on its own. And if 2 states got into an argument and were about to go to war with each other, there was no court system to decide who was at fault and who was not. All in all, this national government was very weak and could not keep these states together other than to win the war. The final weakness I want to point out is from the top of the chart, and that's that if they ever wanted to make a change to the Articles of Confederation, they had to get all 13 states to agree. That's impossible to do in government. To get a 100% vote, just very, very hard. And the reason they had to get a 100% vote is because every state thought of themselves as sovereign, and they didn't want any other states being able to tell them what to do unless they agreed to it. As our government is becoming weaker and weaker and other countries are starting to realize we might be ripe for taking, the final straw is something called Shays' Rebellion, where our own farmers who were not paid for their fighting in the Revolutionary War as they were promised, since the government had no money, and since there was nobody to help them with all of the troubles they were going through once the war was over, took up arms against our nation and revolted. Although the revolt was put down, it showed our founding fathers that when your own people are willing to take on the government and try to kill them, something major is going on and something major is wrong. So some of the founding fathers meet at the Annapolis Convention, and the main outcome from that is that they decide they're going to have to meet again in Philadelphia and revise the Articles of the Confederation, fix it. What happens actually, though, is the next time they meet, they decide to throw it in the trash and start over, and that is where we get the Constitution at the Constitutional Convention. The final part of these notes for you to copy, just want to make sure you realize the Articles weren't completely bad. It did create great state constitutions that we could use to write our eventual constitution, and it is an example of trial by error. We were trying out different kinds of governments. We figured out that a confederation wouldn't work, and we moved on to something better, federalism in the U.S. Constitution.